Hey you guys, it's Willow. So I wanted to share with you some information about HJR-192 and the Executive Order 6102 that was signed into effect by President Roosevelt. I said that kind of weird. This executive order required that all gold and gold certificates to be surrendered to the federal government by May 1st of 1933. So any citizen that had gold bars, gold certificates, gold coins, they were forced to deliver all of their property to the federal government, or they could potentially be jailed if not. So that's like theft. To me, that's theft. It's theft. So after that executive order was passed, Executive Order 6102, the House Joint Resolution 192, which is the HJR 192, that was passed by Congress on June 5th of 1933. So, in 1933, this was the year that the United States went bankrupt. And it wasn't the first time that we went bankrupt. The United States was bankrupt twice before that. Once in 1789, when the forming of the Constitution so that the states could be responsible for paying the Fed's debt. And then in 1861, the southern states said that they weren't going to deal with that anymore. They were not going to be pledging their assets to pay the federal government's debt anymore. They were done with it. Okay. So then in 1933, June of 1933, when the executive order was passed, and then with HJR 192, they took all the gold, all the true money, all the property, and instituted eminent domain and property taxes, divided land titles, and instituted the income tax to control the labor of the people. In addition, with HJR 192, that is when they instituted the birth certificates to control the people and have the future American people become the collateral for all the federal government's debts, because the state wasn't going to pay it anymore. So, yes, your birth certificate is a title to your body, and it has been pledged as an asset. The holder has the right to the taxes and the fines and the fees, etc., that you pay to the government through judgments, court costs, payroll, income taxes, property taxes, and all of that stuff. From the very beginning, the government was in debt with European bankers. And as a result of the revolution, it's ironic that we had to borrow money from England to pay for a war that we fought against them in. So fast forward to the early 1900s, and you'll come across several key events that make it quite obvious that there was a master plan in works to enslave the people. If you read the book named The Creature from Jekyll Island, you'll become intimately acquainted with the happenings of that year in 1910, when 6 men who were rather either elite bankers or politicians or whatever they were higher up in the freaking world, they all met in Jekyll Island to try to figure out a way to reform the economics in the United States of America. And this is where the banking cartel began. The central bank, that whole entire idea had been rejected multiple times. So these 6 dudes that went off on this little island, they had to figure out a way to sneak the idea in so that they could have the central banking institutions be put into order, so they could have economic control or whatever their plan is. 3 years earlier, in 1913, President Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act into effect, which is the central bank in the United States. And even though it is actually not governed by any agencies or federal government, it's still here, and it's still the Federal Reserve, but our government has no actual control over it. It's just private. 8 years later, in 1921, the Maternity Act was passed. And that required that all births be registered with the state. So now all the key pieces are in effect and in place to help the up-and-coming bankruptcy default and restructure that happened. 1933, when the federal government went bankrupt, they passed the Executive Order 6102 and then HJR-192 and pledged us as collateral to back the government's debt, because the states weren't doing it anymore. They made us slaves, but they couldn't technically make us slaves because it would be illegal. So they had to figure out a remedy. They had to figure out what could they do to not make us slaves. And the remedy was the HJR-192. And that was that the government has the obligation to discharge and settle any debts we may incur in our daily lives. Yes, like a mortgage or a car loan or your utilities or whatever. But HJR-192 was repealed. And that brought us into having... But see, even though it was repealed, but technically, we never went back to having money that meant something. The provisions that brought us into having no money of substance still existed and applied. Were still in effect. So, in other words, we didn't go back to using real money, the silver or the gold again. And therefore, whoever brings the obligation must bring a remedy. That still applies. So the government still has the duty to discharge and settle your debts, because we still don't have access to money of real substance. And because the United States is still technically in bankruptcy mode, the Secretary of the Treasury is still the receiver in the bankruptcy. Your birth certificate is still the bond, and your debts are still prepaid by your future labor, property, taxes, and all that stuff. They are assuming, or you would assume that they're assuming that they are still the executor of the estate, which the estate is the straw man name, the all caps name. The system is still thinking that they're the executive of the state. But the birth certificate, is a bond on us. And the fact that any court case that's over $7,000 has new bonds created and traded off is just insane to me. It's just crazy. So, HJR-192, it's really complicated. I've been trying to figure this out. I've been reading about it just to see, just to have the knowledge. And there's really no, I really can't find quite an answer for it, there's not, it's they repealed it, but they can't repeal I guess they could repeal it if they were going to replace it with a remedy, but they did not replace it with a remedy. So I'm wondering if HJR-192 is still technically in order because they never replaced the remedy, is my whole thing. And, a lot of people tried to say that the HJR-192 was a scam, and back in, or way earlier, before, people were accessing their TDA accounts and all that kind of stuff. But we really need to educate ourselves not only on the history of how this all came about, but also stay on the forefront of new technologies that can be used to change our status and obtain the remedy that we need. And that's really what we need to do. But I found all of this stuff interesting about HJR-192, and I just wanted to share it with you guys. So leave me a comment below on what you think about it, or how you feel about it, or what you think the remedy is. Thanks for listening. I love you guys. Please like, share, and subscribe. Bye.